Get your hands off the display case. You're leaving fingerprints on everything. That was the first thing Odette Carmichael heard when she walked through the front doors of Hargrove and Fenn Fine Jewelry on Bloor Street West. Not a greeting. Not a good afternoon. Just that, clipped, cold, delivered from across the showroom floor by a man in a charcoal blazer who hadn't even looked up from his clipboard yet. Odette didn't move her hand. She was barely touching the glass. She had been looking at a pair of sapphire drop earrings in the second case from the door, leaning slightly forward the way anyone would when something catches their eye. Her fingers weren't even on the surface. She was close, yes. But she hadn't touched anything. She straightened up anyway. The man with the clipboard, his name tag read Preston, finally looked at her. His eyes did the thing that Odette had seen 1,000 times in her 51 years. That quick scan. Top to bottom and back up again, taking inventory. Her hair, natural and pulled back loosely with a few gray strands coming loose at the temples. Her coat, a dark navy wool peacoat she'd had for 6 years. Good quality, but not flashy. Her boots, flat-soled, practical for February in Toronto. No handbag. She'd left it in the car. Just her phone in her coat pocket and her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. Preston's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Can I help you find something?" he said, and the words themselves were polite enough, but the tone was the thing. Like he was asking her to explain herself, like her presence in this particular room required justification. "I'm fine, thank you," Odette said, "just looking." Preston didn't move away. He stood approximately 8 feet from her, clipboard at his side, watching. Not the way a salesperson watches a customer who might need assistance. The way a security guard watches someone who has already been decided about. There was one other customer in the showroom, a woman in her 40s in a pale gray coat, being attended to at the far end by a young associate who was laying out bracelet options on a velvet tray. Neither of them looked over. Odette moved to the next case, the engagement rings. She wasn't buying an engagement ring. She was replacing the one she'd given her late husband's mother 20 years ago when they married. A ring that had been lost 6 months ago during a hospital stay. And she'd promised herself she would find something close to it. She'd been in 4 jewelry stores in the past 3 weeks. She had a budget of $18,000, which was more than she typically spent on anything, but felt right for this particular promise to herself. She did not share any of this with Preston. He followed her, not dramatically. He didn't trail her step for step. But when she moved, he repositioned himself. A little closer each time. A second man appeared from the back. Taller, older, with silver hair swept back from his forehead, and the particular posture of someone who had been managing people for a long time, and had a specific way he liked things done. His name tag read Ellison, Senior Associate. He came to stand beside Preston, and the two of them had a brief exchange that Odette couldn't hear. But she could see it, the small nod. Preston's eyes flicking toward her. Then Ellison walked over. "Ma'am," he said, stopping about 4 feet away. Close enough to be direct. Far enough to signal that this was not the opening of a sales conversation. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask whether you have an appointment today." Odette turned to look at him fully. "An appointment," she said. "We do ask that clients looking at our private collection make an appointment in advance. It allows us to prepare properly and ensure you have the best experience." Odette looked around the showroom. The woman in the gray coat had not made an appointment. Odette knew this because the woman had walked in 2 minutes before Odette had, and there had been no mention of appointments at the door. No check-in process, no host station. The door had simply opened, and the young associate had walked over and said, warmly, "Can I show you anything today?" "I don't see a sign about appointments," Odette said. "It's our standard policy for the private collection." Ellison gestured vaguely toward the cases on Odette's left, the same cases she'd been looking at since she walked in. "I see," Odette said. She did not leave. She turned back to the case in front of her. There was a long pause. Then Ellison said, with considerably less warmth than before, "I'm going to have to ask you to make your way out and call ahead to book a time. We have availability on Thursday." Odette looked at the ring in the case. Round-cut platinum band, small paved diamonds along the shoulders. Not quite right, but close. "Thursday," she said. Yes, or I can take your name and number and have someone call you. She turned to look at him again. There was something she recognized in his face. Not malice, or not only malice, discomfort. The particular discomfort of a man who has already committed to a decision and is hoping the other person will simply make it easy for him. She was not going to make it easy for him. My name, she said, is Odette Carmichael. Ellison blinked. She waited a moment. Let the name sit there. Then she reached into her coat pocket. Not for her phone, but for the slim card hold she kept in her left breast pocket, and she placed a single business card on top of the display case, face up, and she slid it gently across the glass toward him. Ellison looked down at it. His face did something complicated. The card read, Odette Carmichael, co-founder and chief executive officer, Carmichael Fenn Jewelry Group Fenn, as in Hargrove and Fenn. And now, because you've already started to feel the shape of what's coming. And if you're watching this for the first time, go ahead and like this video, because this story is about to get very good. Let's back up about 40 years and talk about how Odette Carmichael came to own the building that Ellison was standing in. Odette was born in 1973 in Scarborough, the second of 4 children. Her father, Calvin Carmichael, worked in manufacturing. Her mother, Gloria, cleaned offices downtown 3 mornings a week and ran a small alterations business out of their basement the rest of the time. They were not wealthy, they were not struggling, they were the particular kind of steady that requires both parents to be paying attention every single day. What Odette got from her mother was hands. Gloria Carmichael could look at a piece of fabric, or a button, or a broken clasp, and understand it at some level that other people couldn't. She could fix things that other people would throw away. She had an eye for what was repairable and what was not. Odette inherited this, applied it, as it turned out, not to fabric but to business. She studied economics at the University of Toronto, graduated in 1995, spent 3 years working at a small investment firm downtown, before she understood that she was not built for investment banking. She was built for building things. She left in 1998 with her savings, a business plan, and a contact she'd made through a church acquaintance. A retired master jeweler named Bernard Fenn, who was 72 years old, arthritic in both hands, and in possession of a lease on a small workshop on Queen Street West that he could no longer use but couldn't bear to give up. They made an unusual partnership. Bernard supplied the expertise, the tools, the decades of relationship with suppliers, and the name. Odette supplied the capital, the business strategy, and the willingness to do every administrative task that Bernard had been ignoring for the better part of a decade. They opened Carmichael Fenn in 2001 as a custom jewelry workshop. By 2005, they had a second location. By 2010, they had 5. Bernard Fenn passed away in 2014, leaving his share of the company to Odette in his will. A fact that surprised almost everyone who knew him, and surprised no one who had watched them work together for 16 years. By then, the company had grown to include retail locations, a wholesale division supplying independent jewelers across Ontario, and a property portfolio that included, among other things, the building on Bloor Street West that housed Hargrove and Fenn Fine Jewelry, a boutique they had acquired in 2018, rebranded and staffed under a general manager who had apparently not briefed his senior associates on who held the lease or who signed the checks. That general manager's name was Rowan Beauchamp. He had been in the role for 14 months. He was, by all measurable accounts, not going to be in it much longer. But Odette didn't know any of that yet. She was still standing at the display case. She was still watching Ellison look at her business card. The color that moved into Ellison's face started at the collar of his shirt and worked its way upward. It was not a flush of embarrassment, exactly. It was more specific than that. It was the color of a man who has just understood that the story he told himself about this situation was wrong in a way that cannot be undressed. "Mrs. Carmichael," he said. "I know," Odette said. Preston had moved closer during all of this, the way people do when they sense something has shifted, and they're not sure yet which way it's going. He was now perhaps 6 feet away, and his clipboard was at his side, and he was reading the situation the way a person reads the weather. There was a long moment of silence, the kind of silence that has weight. I think there may have been a misunderstanding, Ellison began. There wasn't, Odette said. Not harshly, just clearly. The way you correct a factual error, without anger, without drama, just a correction. There was no misunderstanding. You asked me to leave. You invented an appointment policy that doesn't exist. Preston followed me across the showroom. None of that was a misunderstanding. Ellison opened his mouth. I'd like to see the manager, Odette said. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know that this is usually the moment when things escalate. When the person in charge doubles down, or when someone calls actual security, or when the whole situation spirals in a direction that everyone involved is going to regret. And we'll get to all of that. But first, I want you to drop a comment and tell me, what do you think Rowan Beauchamp did when he got the call that his CEO was standing in the showroom? Because I want to know what you're predicting before I tell you what actually happened. Rowan Beauchamp was not in the building. He was, as it turned out, at a lunch that had run long, about 2 kilometers away. And the person who answered the phone when the front desk called back to the office was his assistant, a young woman named Tara Lynn, who had been in the role for 4 months, and who had, unlike her employer, actually read the company onboarding materials. Tara Lynn knew exactly who Odette Carmichael was. She had seen her photograph in the company's internal directory. She had processed Odette's signature on 3 separate memos in the previous fiscal quarter. When Tara Lynn walked to the front of the building 12 minutes later, she did not do what Rowan Beauchamp would have done. She did not attempt to smooth things over or reframe the narrative. She walked straight to Odette and said, "Mrs. Carmichael, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened here. Can I get you anything? Would you like to sit down?" Odette looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Tara Lynn. No, I'm fine. I'd just like a few minutes with whoever is actually in charge today." Ellison, who was still standing nearby and had not moved, said quietly, "That would be me." "I know," Odette said. And she looked at him with something that was not anger, and not forgiveness, and not exactly either. Something steadier than both. They sat in the small consultation room at the back of the showroom, the room that was typically used for private viewings of high-value pieces. Tara Lynn brought water. Ellison sat across from Odette, with his hands flat on the table, and said, without being asked, "I owe you an apology. The way I handled that was wrong. I'm not going to try to explain it." Odette looked at him for a long moment. She was 51 years old. She had been in this particular situation, or variations of it, more times than she could count. In boardrooms, in restaurants, at airport gates, at the front desk of hotels where she had a reservation. She had learned over the years what to do with the aftermath. She said, "Tell me what actually happened today, from your perspective." It wasn't a generous offer. It was a strategic one. She wanted to understand what he had seen, what conclusion he had drawn, and how quickly he had drawn it. She wanted to understand the machinery. Ellison was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I saw a woman come in without a handbag, wearing a coat that was..." He stopped, started again. "I made assumptions about what she was there for. Those assumptions were wrong." "They were," Odette said. "What were you worried about?" He looked uncomfortable. "Theft," he said. Finally, "Because of the coat," Odette said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "My coat is 6 years old," Odette said. "I've had it cleaned twice. I didn't bring my handbag because I never bring a bag when I'm doing retail research. I find it makes the whole experience cleaner, easier to move around. I have never stolen anything in my life. And I was in this store to replace a ring that has a great deal of sentimental value to me, with a budget that your commission structure would have found very interesting." Ellison closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he said, "I understand." "Do you?" Odette said. Not combatively, genuinely. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think I understood it in the moment too. I think I did it anyway." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Odette in a confrontation like this in 20 years. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, gathered her card from where it had been placed on the table between them, and said, "I'm going to send you an email this week. I want a full staff review. Not just your team, the whole location. Unconscious bias training. Customer service audit. Rowan will be involved, but I'll be leading it personally. She buttoned her coat. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said. "I'm asking you to be honest about what happened today and to be willing to do the work. If you can do that, we can move forward. If you can't, I'd rather find out now than later." Ellison nodded. He looked like a man who had aged about 10 years in the last 45 minutes and was not entirely sure if that was a bad thing. Odette walked back through the showroom. At the door, she stopped. She turned back to look at Preston, who was standing behind the near display case, with the expression of someone who has been watching a building on fire from across the street, and is only now understanding that the building is theirs. "The sapphire earrings in the second case," she said. "Second shelf from the top, right side. What's the price on those?" Preston blinked, looked at the case, looked back at her. "I'd have to check," he said. "Please do," she said. "I'll take them if they're under $4,000. They were $3,200. Odette paid with the black card she kept in her card holder, next to the business cards, and walked out onto Bloor Street, into the February cold with the small navy bag in her hand. She sat in her car for a moment before starting it. She did not feel victorious. She rarely did in these moments. What she felt was tired. Not a personal tiredness, but a deep, structural tiredness. The kind that comes not from what happened to you today, but from knowing how many people it had happened to before you, and how many it would happen to after. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to her assistant. "Please schedule a call with Rowan Beauchamp for Monday morning. I'll send you an agenda." Then she started the car, pulled out onto Bloor, drove west. Rowan Beauchamp received a call from Tara Lynn that same afternoon. By end of business, he had a meeting request from Odette's office. By the following Monday, he had sat through a conversation with Odette Carmichael that he described to a colleague afterward as the most uncomfortable 40 minutes of my professional life, in a way that I think I needed. Ellison remained at the location. He attended every session of the staff training that followed. He became, eventually, one of the more effective advocates for the new customer protocols. Not because he was told to, but because he had been in that consultation room and said the honest thing, and been met not with punishment, but with a demand for accountability, which turned out to be more transformative than either outcome he had feared. Preston requested a transfer to the Queen Street location 3 weeks later. Odette approved it. She suspected he needed a fresh start, and she was not inclined to deny a person that. The sapphire earrings turned out to be exactly right for the occasion Odette had in mind, which was a dinner for her late husband's mother, a woman named Harriet, who was 83 years old and lived in a retirement home in Etobicoke, and who had not, in the 6 months since the ring was lost, once mentioned it or suggested that Odette owed her anything. Which was precisely the reason Odette had spent 3 weeks looking for something to replace it. She brought the earrings to the dinner. Harriet opened the box and looked at them for a long moment and said, "Odette, you didn't have to do this." "I know," Odette said. Harriet put them on at the table, right there in the middle of the restaurant, without a mirror. She just put them on and went back to her soup. If you made it to the end of this story, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. This kind of story doesn't get told enough. The version where nobody yells, nobody loses their composure, and the person with all the power in the room is the one who walks in quietly and says almost nothing. That's the story worth telling. Subscribe to Birthright Tales if you want more of them, because we have a lot more where this one came from.